Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tatami Room Season 2, Episode 7, Overtime, or Zangyo in Japanese. This is your host, Martin. I've already done an episode on the Japanese workplace. I believe it was episode 15. But this episode, I wanted to kind of hone in on something that I believe Japan is a little bit notorious for, that being overtime. And then I'm also going to talk about one of the reasons that I believe this overtime occurs, that being inefficiencies at the workplace. The Stoic quote for today is from Epictetus. If you want something good, get it yourself. I like that one. I think it's interesting, nice and simple. Quick little personal update. Starting off with, I wanted to give a quick little explanation as to why I'm a few days late with this episode. I've had this episode all typed up, ready to go. Just the recording part has been a little difficult. I've gotten multiple takes in. I just haven't really liked the way it's come out so far, so I'm re-recording it again. I really want to make sure that I get this one right. I think it's a really interesting episode, and I think it's a sensitive one as well. So I'm striving for a bit more perfection on this one. Recently, I've also had the opportunity to go bamboo shoot harvesting. It's a pretty cool thing you can kind of do here in the countryside. Kind of go into the forest a little bit and put on ample amount of bug spray. Pick the bamboo shoot and kind of take off the kind of clean it. And then my friend actually ended up cooking them and making bamboo shoot tempura. I wasn't there for the cooking part, unfortunately. I had to leave a little early, but that's just a cool little activity that you can do here in Tanegashima. Spring break for me was just ended about a week or so ago. It was from March 20th to April 11th, so I had about 2.5-ish weeks of office time, desk warming, and that time I was kind of reading, studying, working here and there, trying to be productive and whatnot. But now this week I've started going back and rotating around schools teaching again, and I'm very glad that I can do that. It's reading, studying, and whatnot. It wasn't bad. It was a nice little change of pace, but I enjoy teaching, and I need to be out there again. Some of those days at the office felt incredibly slow. So glad to be back. With that being said, let's get right into things. Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. See you in a bit. Alright, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started talking about overtime. First thing that I want to note is that ALTs, so my job, assistant language teachers, we're good. We are not required to do overtime. Our contract is quite strict, and it explicitly states, our working hours. So, I'm good. But I will be talking about my observations and my anecdotes first, and then I'll follow that up and weave in some sources that kind of corroborate my story and my observations about overtime here in Japan. First, I want to talk about the exact amount of overtime that I think is occurring. So I wrote my observations down, or what I kind of suspected before I did any research, and we'll see how kind of my observations compare to the articles that I'm going to cite later on. And the first category or group of people that I wanted to talk about doing overtime is teachers. So obviously I'm a teacher. I work with a lot of teachers, so I feel like I got some credibility in describing their working hours. I would say that teachers get in to school to work around 7:30 a.m. and they'll stay till about 5. So this 10 or so hours is pretty standard, I would say. Thing is, even you work 10 hours, you think, okay, you have a long break, right? Unfortunately, not really. Yeah, the break that you do get is you you eat lunch, but you eat lunch with the students, which it's not much of a break, right? And then after that, even though there's recess and whatnot, people aren't seen like relaxing, kicking it back. I feel like relaxing or not doing anything productive at work is seen as quite bad and negative. And so usually most teachers, after they eat, they'll just go back to pushing papers, grading and whatnot. I think they obviously do it at a slower pace, maybe when it's recess or something. But they have to keep up this appearance of doing something. They can't just like kick it back and watch a YouTube video. Additionally, so this is the 10 hours per weekday, but most teachers also work a little bit over the weekends as well. Saturday is pretty standard, I would say, a couple hours on Saturday for most teachers. And in Kagoshima, I think this is a prefectural thing. We're a lucky prefecture, so we have a thing that is called Doyo Jugyo, which means Saturday school. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's only a half day, but the second Saturday of each month is Doyo Jugyo. All my teachers love it. They don't, but yeah, that's another kind of that's more work added on. But so 50 hours for weekdays, and then add, I don't know, a little bit more on top during the weekends. I mean, you're definitely pushing like 10 plus hours of overtime per week, I would say. I'm moving on to people who work at the city hall, and I'm going to generalize to like city hall workers or public workers in general. But my observation is that if you're at the tippy top, you're kind of chilling. Like if the tippy top, you serve as mostly like a figurehead, if that makes sense. You'll go to meetings. You'll introduce yourself to principals. You're kind of representing, but in the sense of doing the nitty gritty. Assigning teachers here and there, looking out for teachers' pay, looking out for new people that are coming in, finding them the teacher housing, looking at incoming transfers and whatnot. They'll just say like, okay, this is what we should do. They'll give like the final kind of go ahead, but it's not them putting together the work. The people that are a peg or two below the tippy top, they're grinding. They're really pushing some very serious hours. And one thing that I thought was that illustrates over the overtime kind of culture and situation here in Japan is that 9 to 5 here, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. is considered a part-time job, right? It kind of tells you a lot, right? In America, that's a full. I think in most places around the world, that's a full-time position, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I was talking to one of my coworkers, and she said, "Yeah, I only do part time." And I said, "Wait, so I see you around the office all day. What time do you come in? What time do you leave?" She said, "Oh, 9 to 5." And so that kind of surprised me, and it does make sense that 9 to 5 is part time because the office workers, the public workers, they're pushing around 10 to 12 hours, I would say. There's for some, 12 is definitely a standard. On occasion, you will stay till 11 p.m. and pull like a 15-hour shift. Recently, because we had spring break, but the way that the Japanese school system works is that the new school year starts after spring break. So essentially, it's the start of a new school year for us here in Japan, and that has a bunch of administrative stuff that comes along with it. And so everyone, all the teachers and the city hall public workers as well, have been super bogged down with work. And so I think these 15-hour shifts have been a trend recently. I mentioned that for teachers there's sometimes explicitly doyo jugyo on Saturday, and that they go into work on Saturday as well sometimes. But I would say that this is even more common, or just as common, for public workers, city hall workers. Uh, Going to work on Saturday and pulling a full shift, that's usual. There's one of my coworkers who does Saturday and most Sundays as well. This I don't know how they do it or where their motivation is, but this guy's in the office every single day, and I haven't seen him take a vacation day or a sick day. So I mean, he's I guess he's quite robust in that sense. No days off. And finally, in terms of while we're discussing kind of overtime that people work, I have one of my acquaintances is a small business owner, and I talked to him briefly about his working hours, and it's not a big sample size, but they definitely work 50 plus hours a week. So we're looking at about 10 plus hours of overtime, most likely more. So this is kind of, I was just mentioning, so teachers, about 10 hours, city hall workers, 10 to 12, 12 hours per day being more standard for some, and then even small business owners, quite a large amount of overtime worked. I wanted to do some research and observe whether are my kind of and look at whether my observations were representative. Did I just end up working in the deep south in Kagoshima, or is this kind of all over the place in Japan? Unfortunately, based off of kind of I'm not reading I'm not reading research papers, but based on the articles that I read, there is an unhealthy amount of overtime in most places in Japan. Looking at a chart created by Nippon.com, the data from the Japanese Ministry of Health, some 80% of men do some form of overtime, and around 10% of them are in extreme overtime, which means 20 plus hours of overtime worked per week. This figure is a little bit better for women. Only 64%, about 64% of women are working overtime. But the problem is that women are much more likely to experience other forms of harassment at work. So now that I've kind of talked about the amount of overtime in play here, I wanted to discuss, okay, what is the effect of overtime? Because it's not just something that exists and doesn't have any tangible effects. And unfortunately, the effects of overtime are not positive whatsoever. And I'm talking about the health effects here, not the economical effects. Effects can range from something a little bit more mild, like sleep deprivation, to things like anxiety, stress, depression, and even, unfortunately, suicide. So this part of the episode is going to get a little bit darker, so I apologize for that, but I'm just going to discuss some things I found while researching overtime here. It says, according to the Japan Times, 90% of people say they need 6+ hours of sleep, and only about 50% of them are getting that. So that's on the sleep deprivation front. Another Nippon.com article found with the Ministry of Health data, there's a direct correlation between hours worked and symptoms such as anxiety, stress, and depression. People who work over 60 plus hours, the group that works over 60 hours, 50% of them are at least concerned about depression, and about half of this group suspect depression or severe depression. These negative symptoms, the anxiety and stress, are obviously compounded by the lack of sleep. The overtime in Japan is so bad that in Japanese, there's even a word or a phrase for death from overwork, that being karoshi, and it literally just translates to death from overwork. I've studied a few languages. I lived in Hungary. I speak English. I speak Hungarian. Studied Spanish for quite some time, and Japanese is the first language that I've studied that has a specific word that just sums up death from overwork. So I thought that was kind of interesting and a little somber at the same time. And in terms of karoshi, or death from overwork, this figure used to be mostly white-collar job men. More recently, it has increased to 20% women as well. And the way that karoshi occurs, as one might suspect, is heart attacks, strokes that are linked to stress, and in some cases, even suicide. So, looking at all of this, here's a situation, right? We have a lot of overtime being worked. We're looking at 10 to 20 hours of overtime per week, and this overtime is pretty severely affecting not just mental health and quality of life with sleep deprivation, but also has some pretty drastic results like karoshi and depression. So what has been done to kind of curb this? What is there anything in place to stop this? And there is. The problem is that the regulations that are in place are, unfortunately, they don't have teeth. They're not effective at stopping the extreme amount of overtime that is occurring here. For example, in 2014, a law called Law Promoting Measure to Prevent Death and Injury from Overwork was passed. The problem is that this law is not legally binding, and some workers are not even aware of the mandatory rest intervals that are included in the law. So I think this law mandates that every 11 that shifts that workers work can't be closer than 11 hours apart. But there are a bunch of workers who are not even familiar, or they're not even aware that this legislation exists. In 2018, another kind of piece of legislation or reform was passed. This one called the Work Style Reform Act, and basically it mandated that people shouldn't be working more than 45 hours of overtime per month. While this sounds well and good, looking at kind of its tangible results, it unfortunately hasn't led to a drop in yearly overwork-related deaths. And you might be thinking, well, there's two pieces of legislation here that are in place. How is this? How are companies still kind of getting away with this? Why is the overtime still occurring? There's a couple reasons for that. One of them being that employers often bypass regulations. So either you instruct your employees to work more, or you make them hide their true working hours. But anyway, you're just trying to get around, especially the overtime hour limit imposed by the 2018 Work Style Reform Act. And in the city hall, for example, there are people who definitely work more than the 45 hours of overtime per month that is allowed. And I don't think that it's necessarily that, the superintendent or the mayor is like, hey, you got to work more. It's just they get a bunch of tasks, deliverables that need to be completed, and the understanding is like you got to get those done. And if they don't get those, it's unacceptable to not get them done. So they're gonna spend however long they need to working on those tasks. And the problem is, someone could say, wow, these tasks are taking such a very long time. Let's kind of reassign and manage. Maybe this task goes to someone else. Take the kind of micromanage and reassign tasks here and there to spread the work better. The problem is, because position A has been doing task 1 for forever, that will not get changed, even if task 1 has become more difficult because suppose the number of students at the school has increased. So this system is one of the reasons why the overtime persists. Another reason is that a lot of people, or some people, are in unions. The problem with unions, unions can stand up. I think last year, was it the SAG-AFTRA strike occurred for actors, actresses, and whatnot. Now, unfortunately, the unions are very conflict averse here in Japan. Labor unions don't really help out, and they're quite passive. Someone, a workplace accident lawyer, was quoted as saying, companies and unions avoid confrontation with each other. I can sort of corroborate this in the sense that conflict and confrontation are avoided at all costs here. little personal anecdote relating to that is that there are people who will rather misunderstand you or pretend to not understand what you're saying than tell you no. Like if I made a request or I was asking a question, and because the person did not want to tell me, oh no, that's not possible. Instead, they just kind of pretended not to understand what I was saying, which I was like, oh my gosh, am I messing up my Japanese? Am I just, illiterate? And then I looked it up later. It wasn't the case. It was just they were pretending not to understand what I was saying because they didn't want that conflict. But anyway, to sum things up, both my observations and what I've read would lend credibility to the idea that there's a pretty serious issue in the overtime front here in Japan. I would say we're looking at 10 to 20 hours of overtime per week per worker. Like I mentioned, this has led to some pretty serious health as well as mental health problems. And unfortunately, even though there are regulations in place, like the 2018 Work Style Reform Act, these regulations have not been effective at curbing overtime and the negative health effects related to it. The next thing that I'm going to talk about after a short break is one of the reasons why I think overtime persists or exists here in Japan, that being inefficiency. So I'll be back with that after a short break. Alright, welcome back everyone. Definitely lost my train of thought there for a little bit in that previous segment, but hopefully it wasn't too bad. So in the previous bit, I kind of talked about the problem, that being overtime, some of its negative effects, something like the anxiety, stress, etc., and kind of why it persists. The legislation is not really being strong. And now I wanted to discuss why overtime, why this problem exists in the first place. I think there's primarily two reasons, first of which being inefficiency in the workplace, which I'll be talking about and I'll be focusing on, and the other being a kind of cultural background framework where overtime culture sort of fits into easily. First order of business, I wanted to mention that there's this economic principle called, or the benefits of specialization. And what that means essentially is that if I get really good at one thing, focus on one thing, and if all my coworkers focus on their own specific individual things, then our productivity is higher than if we have to do all the tasks and we're only mediocre at all the tasks together. The problem is, here in Japan, at least in my office in the city hall, there's not much of that, specialization. People are sort of generalists here, so there's a lot of responsibilities that people have, and it's a wide-ranging kind of amount of responsibilities that people have. So instead of having the time to really develop and get good at one thing, people have to be responsible for a wide manner of things, which what that ends up leading to is they're sort of mediocre at a bunch of different tasks as opposed to being really good at one task. And an example of this is that people in the city hall, people that I work with, oftentimes end up becoming glorified arts and crafts people, or janitors even. There's no janitorial position here in Japan, and so what that means is oftentimes workers will be forced to stop their work and go clean up. I think on Fridays the office literally, I think it's chalked out to like, okay, everyone cleans, you scrub the bathroom and whatnot. And I guess it's a good sort of team building exercise. Like in schools, the kids also clean the classroom. And I think that's cool because it reinforces like this sense of ownership and responsibility. But in the 2 hours that you're cleaning the bathroom on Friday, the city hall isn't suddenly going to look fresh and new. and it really just takes away from what you're supposed to be doing, which is like administrative stuff, managing new teachers, setting up meetings with principals, etc. Right? If you have to, every time you're investing time into doing the school administration stuff, but every couple hours you have to get up and scrub the bathroom or make some pamphlets, then it's like your productivity just falls. So that's one reason. There's not really a specialization thing here. People are more generalists, I would say. Another thing that I would say makes things more inefficient here is what's called tenkin. Tenkin is job change. And you might be thinking, oh well, people change jobs in America as well. If you don't like your job, you just go change it. No, that's not how it works. By tenkin, what I mean is that public workers and teachers rotate every 3 to 5 years. So every 3 to 5 years, whether they want to or not, teachers and public workers are forced to move. And you might be thinking, oh, they just go to the school next door or something. No, this is a whole prefectural thing. So teachers will be moving, from Tanegashima to Kagoshima, or from Ibuski to Tanegashima. So it's a very like a long distance move potentially, and perhaps it's good for teachers who are like, hey, I really want to go to Kagoshima. I'm stuck on Tanegashima teaching. It's great for them, but even among teachers who teach in Tanegashima, there's those that get really attached to their students. Right, and I think as a teacher, I'm kind of rotating around schools, but there's definitely a connection that you develop with the kids that you work with, and having to rotate every 3 to 5 years, man, it's tough, it's hard. And I mean, I will be leaving Japan in July, and I'm already kind of not looking forward to that period when I have to tell the kids like, hey, I'm leaving. And having those last classes, that's not going to be fun. And imagine you're working at a school for a couple years. You get to see these kids grow from like little first graders, fourth grade or something, and then next thing you know, you get ordered to go to a city that you've never been to. That's crazy. I think that's insane. So, and it's one thing for teachers, right? The move is inconvenient because you're going to be settling into a new role, a different place. Again, that's another thing that you can look at specialization there. Like I would say, I'm specialized to the ALT role in Tanegashima. I know how to do this job, pretty well, I would say. Now, if I have to move to, let's say, Ibuski. You've probably heard me say about the ALT position a number of times at this point on the podcast, like, oh, ALTs are different from place to place, and I mean the ALT position can range from me rotating around 11 schools to only having one school or a couple of schools, so it really is different. And I imagine that if I rotated to a different city hall, it would be hard for me to adjust as well, and my productivity would not be as high. I'd have to relearn how to kind of get adjusted to that new city hall, the people there, etc. So it's already inconvenient for teachers, but get this: public servants also rotate. So the people in the city hall are also rotating around, and they're not just rotating within the same jobs; they're rotating interdepartmentally. So one of the new bosses or higher ups in the Department of Education where I'm employed, he has never had anything to do in his professional career. I think this dude is, I would say, like around 60 years old, give or take. He's never had a job that's been related to kind of education. His job at the city hall has always been finance related. He's been in the finance sector, rotating back and forth. I don't exactly know too much about what he did prior, but what I do know is that he has never had a job in Kyoiku Inkai, the Department of Education, and get this. Imagine that you're not only switching like places where you're working, which is already kind of a big shift. You're not only are you switching places, you're also switching roles, which just adds another thing of like, okay, now you have to relearn how to do this, how to do this, how to do that. That is just incredibly inefficient to me. I think if you've focused your entire career on like, okay, I know how to do the treasury notes, I know how to do the bank notes, I'm good at managing the city's finances, and then boom, next thing you know, you're supposed to be like, okay, how can I manage teachers and the study abroad program and whatnot? I mean, that's just, and especially once you get to 60 years old, it's like you don't want to be you don't want to be doing that. I can't imagine like getting to that age where you're just comfortable doing your own thing and then having to start this process of learning your job all over again. That's just crazy to me. So I think Tenkin, this like job change thing, it's super weird. It's not good for teachers. I don't think it's good for students either. Your teacher just suddenly up and leaves. And in terms of city hall workers, it's like, I mean, maybe you're excited that you get to try a fresh new position and you get a new experience, but it's like you're throwing away all those hours you've invested into specializing in your position, and now you have to pick up and basically start, maybe not from level 0, but you're starting fresh. Finally, another thing that kind of makes things more inefficient is that things just seem to move slow here. Don't get me wrong. If you file something, it will, like the request or whatever, it will get processed, but it takes time. And one of the interesting anecdotes I have about this is that my my old supervisor, who by the way was working in the Department of Education and now he's working with the construction team. Who knows how that happened? But he was mentioning like, yeah, one of my our boss, he does so much overtime because he just likes to do things slowly. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, not only is that like, bad for him because he's doing overtime, but it's like now that's kind of slowing everyone down. And you might be thinking like, well, that's a little counterintuitive. You're creating overtime for yourself, and not only that, but you're kind of slowing the entire operation down. That doesn't make much sense. And one of the reasons for that is people aren't motivated to complete things fast. It's better to do things slowly and to show how much overtime you can do. And this is speaking to more of that sort of cultural element here in Japan, where it's like, oh, I want to show everyone how much overtime I'm doing. I'm such a hard worker. And so people are like, okay, well, I don't need to really dial in and like get this done ASAP. I'm gonna take my time. It'll get processed. It'll get there. And look, I'm not saying that this is the case for everyone and for kind of all processes, but I know that I've filed some things. For example, I think I wanted to have my rent automatically withdrawn from my bank account. That took like 7 months to get done, which I don't know, maybe it's. I imagined it would have been a procedure that gets done faster than 7 months. on on a final note, if you do so much overtime in the U.S., your ass is getting fired for being inefficient. If you're taking things slowly, you're racking up that overtime 1.5x pay. Your boss is coming to you and being like, hey, what are you doing? Why are we paying you 20 hours of overtime for tasks that could have been done in like 0 overtime? Now, I do want to note that I'm not the only one who sort of feels this way about Japan and the inefficiency here. Based on my research, there's a whole list of reasons created by Japan Today as to why Japan or Japanese people are very slow to make decisions. And 3 of the reasons that I kind of picked out that I wanted to highlight was, 1, there's no authority at the lower levels. Everything moves in a line upwards, and then trickles back down very slowly. And I can definitely agree with that. Number two is that risks are avoided. Being wrong is very bad. And that's also because, if you're wrong or you kind of mess up, then your supervisor or your superior can get in trouble, which is, really embarrassing. So essentially, you're only going to act if you're 100% sure that what you're doing is the right thing, which takes time. You have to double check this and double check that, and like, oh, now I'm 100% sure. So risks are avoided at all costs. Number three is follow the old ways. Now, there's the high pressure of being wrong, especially if you take initiative. If you say, oh, well, I'm gonna do this my way, and then your way ends up being wrong. Ooh, that's bad. But if you're gonna follow the old way, well, you can't be wrong then. If I keep doing what was done before, you just say, oh, that wasn't me. I was just doing what they were doing. So that kind of eliminates that stress of being wrong. So you're just gonna keep doing what others did before you. And yes, I mean all three of these reasons I would say are very accurate. Another article by the East Asia Forum as to why the Japanese workplace is inflexible said that there's a lot of it said that free riding is viewed as extremely bad. So what I mean by free riding is that if you're just kind of sitting there slacking off, not doing anything in the group project, you do not want to be doing that. It's extremely embarrassing to not contribute here in Japan, and I can corroborate that. And honestly, it's part of the reason that I'm quite motivated to work when I'm at the office during the spring break desk warming days that I had was like, oh, well, everyone around me is working incredibly hard, or at least it seems like it. I don't want to be the one person that just kind of like kicking it back and just chilling the entire day. So that's why I said, okay, well, the work that I can do is study Japanese or learn about Japanese culture through reading books. So I sat down there and I stuck to it, that, or at least I tried to. Now, that same article by the East Asia Forum also said that here in Japan, the work performance is measured in terms of input as opposed to output. So you measure what you put in. So how many hours of time do you put into your work, as opposed to in places I feel like in the U.S. you would measure the output rather than the input. Like, okay, doesn't matter how many hours you put in, you were able to output this 3 tasks. Great job, that sort of thing. But input's easier to measure. It's a bit less subjective. Like, oh, I worked X amount of hours. Output is a little bit more difficult. It's like, oh, how many cases did you finish, or what tasks did you complete? That's a little bit harder to compare across the board, which is why it's like, oh, hours worked. Everyone works in hours, or minutes, whatever unit, whatever metric you want to use. But you can kind of compare that across the board and say, oh, well, he's the hardest worker, they're the hardest worker, etc. And again, that just kind of feeds into what I was saying earlier, is you're not motivated to get stuff done on time, because you're actively seen as a better worker if you kind of take things slowly and mull over them and whatnot. Your input's what's being measured after all. And finally, the final reason that this article said that the Japanese workplace is inflexible and inefficient was that there's long-term employment here. And what this means is that people are essentially employed for life. If you get a job at the city hall, for example, unless you retire, resign, or you get fired, which you're only going to get fired if you commit like a major crime. But besides that, you're kind of set for life. Like you're gonna stay there for basically the entire time. And this was initially meant to protect workers from randomly losing their jobs. It's great. You have job protection, but then it kind of turned a little bit sour. It's turned into a sort of prison both for the employers and the employees, right? The city hall can't let you go, or your job can't let you go, even when there's a surplus of labor, even when they don't need you, and they would, be much more profitable for them to let you go. Now, this doesn't work, the best with the. I just got startled. My water bottle popped. But this doesn't work the best with the city hall, because obviously they're not motivated by profit. But for a company that is, and you're just kind of chilling there, not doing anything, or pretending to be doing overtime, it'd be a lot better for them if they were able to let you go. But in many cases, they can't. And then in cases where there's a shortage of labor, right, when the company could definitely hire more workers, it's the amount of workers stays the same, but the number of tasks increases, and you're just going to be in the meat grinder for however long that busy period lasts, because the company is only going to hire in period X, because they can't just be hiring left and right. If they do, they have to keep those workers on. So, and it's a bad situation both for the employers and the employees. This rigid structure means that if the company does well, then no extra labor is hired, since they must be kept. And if a company does poorly, then it's going to incur losses due to excess labor. So that's kind of what I had on inefficiency. Just to conclude things and wrap things up, basically, I would say, in my opinion, the inefficiency is a result of a lack of specialization here, the presence of tenkin, or just job changes left and right, and then the fact that people just aren't motivated to get things done fast. Now, the people not being motivated part, I think that's definitely subjective, and I don't want to apply that across the board, but I think it contributes to the overtime problem for sure. Now, in terms of what the article said, the Japan Today kind of feels the same way. It would characterize Japan as a place where decisions are made slowly, and then in the article by the East Asia Forum, it characterizes the Japanese workplace as inflexible, which I would probably just say is a synonym almost for inefficient. I guess to end things on a little bit more of a positive note, there's a little bit of hope, light at the end of the tunnel. People are saying that due to globalization and demographic changes, there's been a sort of shift in Japanese work culture, and COVID-19 provided this sort of shock that kind of is forced companies to adapt to newer standards to some extent. This can be seen mostly in Japanese startups. They're sort of the vanguard for shifting Japanese work culture. The thing is, these changes, these drastic changes, definitely have not reached to places like Kagoshima, but maybe even if they're sort of getting started in Tokyo, that's a good sign. And this is based off of another East Asia Forum article and a Financial Times article. All right, thank you all for listening. I'm going to cut to the closing section. All right, if you've made it this far, you're an absolute trooper. Thank you so much. This has been a long episode. I feel like it was interesting. Again, I apologize for taking so long to get it out, but you can probably tell this one was a lot. Going from overtime to inefficiency, and just trying to make sure I sound coherent. I feel like that was definitely difficult. So long episode. Thank you for thank you for staying. The word of the week is katajikenai. Katajikenai. And this means grateful or indebted. And it's a fancy word. It's not like if you are just thanking your friend for something random, you're not going to say, oh, katajikenai. You're probably going to hit them with the good old arigato or arigato gozaimasu. But the reason I thought that katajikenai should be the word of the week is recently I've started watching this show called Shogun on Disney Plus, and they use a lot of kind of fancy language, keigo in there, and so I thought it was quite funny. I've actually said katajikenai to some of my coworkers sometimes, just kind of ironically, and it gets a laugh, when I use it. Just very very formal language that you wouldn't expect someone to use, much less someone who's not completely good, not completely adept at Japanese yet. The stat of the week is 3 and 19, and these stats are the number of people who switched in my department. So in the Department of Education, 3 people ended up switching jobs, so the tenkin that I was talking about, and 19 was the number of people that switched jobs at one of my schools. I think this was at either the big elementary school or at the middle school. There's 19 teachers, so I think it was definitely more than half of the whole faculty just gone and switched out. I think that's crazy. It's pretty insane. Even in the department, so my department has 7 people, so 3 of them being gone, almost half the team just switched out. And yeah, it's been a crazy period because everyone's trying to get used to their new jobs and new positions. For example, my supervisor, I've kind of had to tell them like, hey, so can you send me the schedule for the school, because I don't know what I'm going to be teaching and when I'm going to be teaching it. And so that's been a process this week. And sometimes it's not even his fault. Some of the vice principals are new. The vice principals are responsible for sending the schedule from the school to my supervisor, who then sends it to me. And the past couple days, the schedule actually didn't come in till like the morning of, or we had to even call the school and remind them like, hey, like what time do you want Martin to come in? So yeah, it's an adjustment period for everyone, which again, it's inefficiency. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. I hope you have found this episode interesting. I think the overtime culture in Japan is quite notorious for it, like I said, and I tried my best to kind of portray the situation and kind of give a reason as to why it exists. With that, per Aspera Ad Astra, and I'll see you in the next episode.